Should we do WikiLeaks?
Let's try the WikiLeaks. This is the documentary. Because there's a drama on the way.
There is, apparently, yes, with Benedict Cumberbatch, in fact. So We Steal Secrets.
He's a busy boy.
He's a very busy boy. And I'm not going to quote him again from Star Trek because I don't want to get the plot spoiler hate mail. So, documentary by Alex Gibney, who made things like Enron, Smartest Guys in the Room, Taxi to the Dark Side, and recently the extraordinary Mea Maxima Culpa, Silence in the House of God. I mean, terrific pieces of investigative journalism, which are much more on the kind of the Errol Morris school of interrogation rather than the kind of, the Michael Moore, look at me antics. So essentially, the heart of this is the story of Julian Assange, who was the guy who set up WikiLeaks, which was dedicated to getting information, sort of secrets, out into the public. And the film follows his career from somebody who's sort of young and interested in freedom of speech and human rights and also technology to somebody who is essentially cast suddenly into the spotlight when this great big cache of information is put into the public by him and also by The Guardian and by other sort of newspapers around the world in what was described as this kind of perfect storm of an information leak. Here's a clip.
He woke up late, of course. I'm knocking on the door, Julian, come on, man. He gets up. Just his normal thing,
What's the time?
25 to.
I need to prepare a little list of things.
All right, I'll be 2 minutes. How are you feeling?
Tired, haven't been to sleep, but good. 14 pages in The Guardian this morning. Massive leak of secret files exposes true Afghan war. We tell our sources maximum political impact, and I think we got pretty close.
There's 10 trucks out there. 10 media trucks.
Yeah. So it'll be a good outcome.
He walked out that door as the sort of ageing student hobo. By the time, he'd made this 50-yard walk, he was a rock star. He was one of the most famous guys on the planet.
So the title "We Steal Secrets" is a quote from this guy from the CIA who says in one of the very sort of candid, former CIA says in this very candid interview, look, this is how it works. This is how intelligence works. We steal secrets. We all do it from each other, and this is how the world works. And the film is full of very, very candid interviews. Crucially, it doesn't have an interview with Julian Assange, and it doesn't have an interview with Bradley Manning, who was the person who first passed the information, that was then used by Assange and then by The Guardian in what became, the biggest information leak in modern history, And as far as the Assange thing is concerned, the filmmaker's take on this is that he approached Julian Assange for an interview, but Julian Assange requested £1 million, I think it was, a large payment of money, and they weren't willing to do that. And so the documentary has, at its heart, an absence. Now, in the case of the telling of the story is basically one of noble failure, that somebody starts out with a series of sort of, he's very, very smart, very kind of single-minded, very unusual character who's got this great interest in freedom of information, and then, as was demonstrated in that clip, somebody says he becomes a rock star. And as this takes over, certainly as portrayed by the documentary anyway, and I stress as portrayed by the documentary because the documentary is a version of the truth in the same way that everything else is a version of the truth, he starts to become guilty of exactly the things against which he rails. And the documentary includes interviews from people who work with him saying he became, completely controlling of the website, that actually he started to want to control information in exactly the way that he didn't want to before. In that, he's always talking about freedom of information is the great thing, but actually he starts getting people to say, well, actually, we won't speak to people that you don't want us to speak to. Meanwhile, in the middle of all this stuff going on, he goes into, asylums and embassies and all the rest of it, there becomes this party line, which is that you're either with us or you're against us. And if you are with us, you are wholly with us. And if you are against us at all, then you are wholly against us. And the documentary basically takes as its through line, therefore, a central character who has what can be seen as, a clear dramatic arc, the noble folly, the noble corruption. And it follows that line through. Now, this has caused an awful lot of controversy. There's been, obviously, on WikiLeaks itself, a very clear declaration that the film is inaccurate. To quote the website, it says it portrays Manning's alleged acts as failure of character rather than triumph of conscience. It says it's a very dangerous proposition for all journalists and media organisations, not just WikiLeaks. I mean, so essentially, they've said this is completely wrong. And if you like this movie and if you enjoy this movie, then you're on the side of badness. Equally, on the other side, there is the argument about whether or not it is possible to say some of the things that somebody did were great and some of the things that somebody did were not great, and the dust hasn't settled, but at the moment it is clear that not everything is absolutely yes or no. Now, what I like about the documentary, I mean, Alex Gibney is a very good storyteller, and he's somebody who's managed to negotiate paths through the most complicated stories in the past. And incidentally, for the record, I think I fundamentally find him to be a trustworthy filmmaker. I mean, that's just my feeling about him. On the evidence of the films that he's made before, if you look at something like Me and Max McCulpa, I think he's somebody who has integrity. And what he's constructed in this documentary is a dramatic arc about a central character and a story which essentially investigates that idea. Funnily enough, an idea which is talked about in A Royal Affair. I mean, the central thing in A Royal Affair is that this guy is very, very sort of free-spirited and believes in, total lack of censorship. And then as power corrupts him, she starts to believe in some of the things he didn't believe in the past. Whether or not you agree with the portrayal of Julian Assange, I think is really not the point. I think as long as people judge this film entirely on the basis of, well, I'm on this side or I'm on that side, it's kind of a bit of a pointless discussion. As a piece of filmmaking, I think it's a really interesting look at one perceived version of this character arc. It does have at its centre an absence because it isn't interviewing its central subject. Arguably, that's kind of used to its advantage, because what you get in the end is an absence where Julian Assange's character ought to be. But I think the idea that, as far as I'm concerned, I went to see it, and afterwards I had a long discussion with people on both sides of the argument. Some people thought it was, it should have just sort of stood up fully for him. Some people thought it, it didn't do him justice. Other people thought, oh yes, it is telling truth. What it did do was it provoked debate. And I'm sorry, but I think it's an intelligent piece of filmmaking, and anything that provokes debate is a good thing. And I also think that what he's managed to do is to find an arc, not the arc, but an arc through a very, very complicated story, and to tell it in a way which is dramatic.
I'm just trying to think of anyone who'd be worth £1 million to interview. And do you get any justification or explanation as to why Julian does he just not want to be on it?
Well, bear in mind, this is just what's been reported in the press, that this was why it didn't happen, was there was an amount of money asked for. That was the figure that was quoted. Some people said, oh, well, that figure's not true. Other people have said, oh, well, that figure was just a way of basically saying no. So who knows? But in the end, it's a matter of judging the film on the sort of, does the film work? Is it dramatically engaging? Yes, it is. Does it have loads of people saying loads of interesting stuff that you wouldn't have expected them to hear? Yes, it does. Does it take a line on its central character? Yes, it does. Do you have to follow that line? No, of course you don't, because it's imagining that it's a part of a conversation in a wider area. But as long as the film is judged on whether or not you're on this side of the argument or that side of the argument, is kind of, it's never going to get anywhere. What the film says is there is a horrible shades of grey thing going on, and it tries to find an arc through it.